Discover the true workings of reason. Although it is safe to believe that no human has ever been entirely logical, our belief in the existence of objective truth has enabled us to develop guidelines for how to approach it. The author contends that by adhering to those guidelines, anyone can effect global change. For instance, reason was crucial in the development of computers, the eradication of illnesses like smallpox, the moon mission, and, more recently, the one-year development of a vaccine to stop a dangerous pandemic. What are the guidelines for reasonable behavior, and how may one develop it? That's exactly what this audiobook will be looking into. Along the way, you'll learn what counting horse teeth can tell us about science, why ignorance can be a sensible decision, and why our fear of being taken advantage of harms public services. Rationality serves as a tool. Starting from scratch, what is rationality? According to dictionaries, being rational means having reason. The Roman word ratio, which meaning reason, is where the term reason originates. Thus, if etymology is confusing, might philosophy be of any use? According to philosophers, rationality is the capacity to use knowledge to achieve objectives. Better? Let's dissect that. Knowledge is the term for justified genuine beliefs. If someone deliberately acted on erroneous assumptions, such as searching for a lost wallet in a place they knew it couldn't be, we wouldn't consider them to be logical. Thoughts like 1 + 1 = 2 are true, but rationality involves more than just having accurate thoughts. It also facilitates our actions. The main takeaway from this is that reason is a means to an end. William James, a philosopher from the United States, wrote an essay on the distinction between rational and non-rational phenomena in 1890. James discovered that when iron filings are dispersed on a table and a magnet is placed nearby, the filings fly toward the magnet and adhere to its surface. They press against the magnet's surface even though it is covered by a card. They never consider removing the card and making direct contact with the magnet. Now consider Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. Romeo is attracted to Juliet. He moves right toward her when there is nothing in his way, just as the filings flowed toward the actual magnet. But notice this distinction. Romeo changes course when he encounters a barrier in his way. Romeo and Juliet idiotically press their faces on its opposite sides like the magnet and the filings with the card, not staying on either side of the barrier. Romeo and Juliet use their understanding of the world to get over obstacles in the play. Romeo climbs a wall to kiss Juliet, and the couple concocts a lie to trick their adversarial families. According to James, this is what distinguishes rational beings from non-rational objects. Iron filings advance straight along toward their destination. But, their route there is predetermined, which is why the card can so easily get in their way. The order is reversed for sensible beings. Romeo and Juliet are very flexible when it comes to how they accomplish their definite end, being together. Human reasoning is demonstrated here. If one path is blocked, we may always attempt another. Selecting between passions is made easier by reason. Just now, we made the case that reason serves as a tool. But from where do the objectives that it aids us in pursuing originate? David Hume, a Scottish philosopher who lived in the 18th century, provided one response. Hume argued that passions are the source of goals. That is, from cravings, motivations, and feelings of adoration, rage, pride, jealousy, and fear. While this is going on, reason is the slave of the passions. Although it can seem that way, this isn't a defense of acting irrationally. Hume was merely emphasizing that reason cannot direct us toward the proper objectives. They are irrational, according to logic, which is neither rational nor irrational. But there are occasions when we have to decide between competing objectives. We then appeal to reason at that point. The main takeaway from this is that reason can help you choose between your passions. If everyone simply cared about one thing, life would be easy. Hedonists could indulge in sensual pleasures without concern for others, and the ambitious might pursue fame and money without regard for their family or friends. Of course, that isn't how life works. We yearn for comfort and pleasure, but we also want to be happy, likable, and raise healthy children. Cake in excess makes us fat. Nobody desires to associate with or be friends with a cunning Machiavellian. Unattended children generate headaches and cause difficulty. You can't always achieve what you desire since goals occasionally conflict. However, how can you choose which objectives to pursue and which to give up? Now enter reason. Reason provides a meter to measure the relative worth of goals across time, which aids in helping us prioritize. Consider the trade-off between health and pleasure. One of the finest arguments in favor of putting temporary pleasure first can be found in a cartoon that appeared in the New Yorker. The drawback of living longer is that all the extra years come at the end, when you're old, asserts a man at a bar. But, based on what we know about the world, maintaining a balanced diet and exercising regularly not only increases life expectancy but also keeps us in good physical condition, increasing the likelihood that we will enjoy those extra years. That will probably result in us being a lot more satisfied. The goal of health therefore seems to be preferable to hedonism. The same is true of ambition. Short-term job advancement is possible with sharp elbows, but it also alienates people you might later need for support. When you pause to consider your objectives, you typically come to the realization that the prudent decisions you make now will benefit you in the future. Self-control and ignorance are both viable options. Understanding something doesn't mean you'll always make logical decisions about it. Often, your ability to resist temptation simply isn't strong enough. Take the Odyssey, a 2,000-year-old epic poem written in ancient Greece. Odysseus, the protagonist, must pass a siren-inhabited island on his way home because sirens are mythical beings whose seductive songs tempt sailors to fall off sharp cliffs, sinking their ships and drowning their crews. Fortunately for Odysseus, a sorceress reveals to him how to resist this deadly temptation. He must fasten himself to his ship's mast and wax seal the ears of his crew. Odysseus takes her guidance and makes it through the passage. It's a tactic that we ought to take note of. This book's main message is that self-control and ignorance are both viable options. Preventing yourself from giving in to temptation is one approach to avoid it. For instance, if you go shopping after eating, it will be much easier to avoid the siren melodies of unhealthy treats. Similar to this, if you've instructed your company to set aside a portion of your paycheck for retirement, you can't spend money that you know you should be saving. Instead of using willpower, this form of Odyssean self-control involves literally nailing yourself to the mast. Because of their wax earplugs, the sailors of Odysseus were unable to hear the sirens. This seems like an unusual strategy at first. After all, doesn't knowledge have power? Since you may always choose not to act on it, isn't it better to know something than to not know it at all? Ironically, there are instances when it makes sense to choose ignorance. One illustration is the choice made by individuals not to determine whether they have a dominant gene for an incurable disease from their parents. Although knowing this won't stop them from getting the illness, it will have an impact on how they live the rest of their life. Moreover, banks post signs warning would-be burglars that staff members are unaware of the combinations to safes. There is no purpose in threatening someone because they cannot expose something they do not know. Simply put, ignorance can keep us safe from harm. It can also mitigate prejudice. Because of this, jury members are not permitted to view hearsay or coerced confession-based unreliable evidence. By performing double-blind tests in which they are kept in the dark about which patients received a medicine and which a placebo, good scientists also ring-fence their work against prejudice. Ignorance helps people remain objective in both situations. The real world is rationalized by science. There are numerous assertions we can make about the world. Consider the statement, all bachelors are single. Is this a true statement? As the term bachelor refers to an unmarried adult male, logic dictates that it must be true. A bachelor can't be married, after all. This makes the claim unfalsifiable because it cannot be refuted. There are other types of falsifiable statements. For example, the statement, all bachelors are miserable, is supported by evidence. You need to get out of your chair and question real, live bachelors whether or not they're pleased to find out whether it's true. If you find just one happy bachelor, you have falsified or disproven the claim. The first type of assertion can be broken down using logic, but the second type requires scientific verification. The main takeaway is that science applies reason to the real world. A group of English monks got into a debate regarding the number of teeth in a horse's mouth in the year 1432. Their argument, which was both intelligent and sour, raged for 2 weeks. Aristotle's writings were used by one group to support their claim that it must be 30, while obscure old texts were used by another group to show that it was actually 50. A third group arrived at the number 45, which they claimed was backed by both Plato and the Bible. On the 14th day, a young friar finally spoke up. He proposed, "Why don't we walk outside and look at a horse's mouth?" This anecdote, which is frequently credited to the English philosopher and scientist Francis Bacon from the 16th century, is most likely made up. But it's simple to understand why it endured through the ages. It serves as a striking example of how Bacon's perspective differs from that of the scholastics. Intellectuals with a background in the church made up the second group, which held the view that only logical worldviews based on reliable texts could aid in world understanding. Bacon held the same view as the young friar that you must walk outside and begin counting horse teeth. Superstition cannot be avoided if empirical evidence is not being gathered. Confirmation bias, the propensity to notice and remember information that support our views and dismiss those that do not, is the word most commonly used today. To maintain our own scientific rationality, that separation is still essential. How can you distinguish between science and pseudoscience? Falsifiability is the key concern for the majority of scientists. Are you seeking information that could disprove your theory, or are you ensconced in unprovable theories? Institutions help us become more sensible and less biased. Monotheism, or the faith in one God, is based on two claims, according to American psychologist David Myers. The first is that a God exists. Second, neither one of us is that God. What does that have to do with reason, though? The concept of rationalism, which holds that there is an objective truth, is comparable. It first asserts the existence of an objective truth and then claims that neither you nor I are aware of it. Hence, rationality is an aspiration rather than a haughty assertion that one is infallible. Although no mortal may claim to have found objective truth, the belief that it exists encourages us to create social norms that bring us collectively closer to it than we could individually. The main takeaway from this is that institutions help us become more reasonable and less partial. James Madison stated in a 1788 essay that there would be no need for government if people were flawless. The American statesman saw human nature as a political issue since we are not, though. We are ambitious and egotistical, frequently favoring our demands over those of others and being oblivious to their problems. We are also capable of being cruel. If left to our own devices, we can end up stepping on other people to advance. Madison came up with a governmental structure that worked with human nature rather than against it as a solution to this issue. He stated that ambition must be made to contradict ambition. Let people to be egotistical and ambitious, but provide a system of checks and balances to stop any one person or group from oppressing others. Institutional safeguards against political tyranny also prevent imperfect individuals from imposing their foolishness on the rest of us. Consider the adversarial system of law, which pits attorneys against each other and relies on fair juries and judges to render judgments. In academia, anonymous peer review fulfills a similar function, ensuring that concepts are evaluated on their merits rather than through the prism of animosities and rivalries. Freedom of expression in the public realm ensures that both popular ideas, which are frequently incorrect, and unpopular ones, which are frequently correct, have a fair hearing. If people were absolutely reasonable, to quote Madison, these institutions wouldn't be required. We need them because no mortal has access to the unchanging truth directly. It's more likely that at least one of us is correct the more we dispute with one another. Those who are punished for their own benefit contribute to a more logical commons. At a performance, it makes sense to stand up if you want a better perspective of the stage. But, that blocks the vision of others, so they stand up as well. Everyone soon stands up, and no one has a better vantage point. The same reasoning applies to arms races. If one nation invests a lot of money creating long-range missiles, it makes sense for its adversary to follow suit, leaving both nations impoverished. These two examples each demonstrate a different rationality paradox. The tragedy of the commons is a phenomena that occurs when everyone acts reasonably and the result could be bad for everyone. This is not an unavoidable fact of nature, it may be remedied by establishing the appropriate rules. The main takeaway from this is that punishing people for their own good leads to a more sensible commons. As citizens, we gain from public services like roads, sewage systems, and schools. These products are a type of commons, anyone can use them, and we are all accountable for maintaining them. But if we are able to consume these products while someone else pays for them, we as people gain more. To free ride is, in other words, the reasonable decision. Our community won't have any money to sustain its public assets if everyone chooses this option. Nobody wants this result, but no one wants to pay taxes while others don't, though that's reward for a sucker. This is a lose-lose situation that will make us all less fortunate. So how can we resolve this conundrum? Let's look at a lab test that economists and psychologists have employed. After being allocated a certain amount of money, participants are given the option of contributing some of it to a community pot. They each contribute $1, and the experimenter matches it dollar for dollar. The optimal course of action for participants is to maximize their combined contributions. They would be better off keeping their money to themselves and letting others contribute. And participants often opt for that tactic. If the experimenter provides them the option of finding free riders, donations stay high and everyone benefits. Once others catch on to what they're doing, they too cease contributing to the pot. The actual world is the same. We are much happier paying our taxes when we understand that those who disobey the law will be punished. We detest the idea of being fools more than we detest the idea of ending up in jail ourselves. Our most fundamental moral principle is compelling because it makes sense. As we've seen, secular laws can compel us to protect the general welfare. Many people think that the most essential thing that religious laws do is make us moral beings. The argument has been around for a very long time. In fact, it has been around for so long that Plato was aware of it 2,400 years ago. But does it still stand? The ancient Greek philosopher disagreed. According to Plato, if anything is moral only because God requires it, then there is no justification for God's commandments, they are only whims. Yet if God does have motivations behind his orders, i.e., if he forbids something because it is immoral, it is not clear why we can't bypass the intermediary and employ those motivations directly. The judgment of Plato. Reason can serve as the basis for morality. The main takeaway is that our most fundamental moral principle is persuasive because it makes sense. Humans are ambitious and egotistical, we want what's best for us even if it hurts the interests of others. We are also sociable animals, though. We rely on people to assist us when we are in need and to stop injuring us intentionally since we live in societies. So how can we cooperate with one another? So let's have a reasoned discussion and establish some ground rules first. Consistency is now the most deadly flaw in reasoning. A contradiction in a set of beliefs can be utilized to conclude anything and anything. It's a prescription for chaos, to put it simply. Imagine if I insist that you not rob me while defending my right to rob you. This rule is incoherent. Everyone is both a I for themselves and a you for someone else at the same time. Thus, it is absurd to argue that because I am me and you are not, I can do something that you cannot. We're likely to agree at this stage that our rules must be equally applicable to everyone. The golden rule, which states that you should treat others as you would like to be treated, is the most powerful moral principle in human history. Or, to put it another way, I shouldn't rob you if I wouldn't like to be robbed by you. This law has its own version in every major world religion, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Also, it's the idea we automatically use to convey morals to our children. We inquire, how would you like it if she did it to you? We can use reason as a tool to achieve our goals in life. By contrasting the short and long-term advantages, it also assists us in prioritizing our goals. But reason is paradoxical. Ignorance is occasionally a more sensible decision than knowledge. In other cases, everyone acting rationally in their own self-interest while disregarding the greater good leads to the worst possible conclusion. These contradictions are the reason why rationality is ingrained in institutions. Our lives are much better and more equitable when our rules compel us to use common sense.